Hey, Walter Sorrells back with another Knife Makers Friday 5. Today I'm going to be focusing mostly on answering viewer mail. So if this is the first time that you've caught me on one of my Friday 5s, most of the time I do how-to kind of stuff, but every few Fridays I'll put out a video where I just answer viewer questions or catch you up on things that are going on with the channel or whatever. So today, mostly viewer mail, but let me just announce before I get rolling on that, I will be at the Blade Show beginning of June. I'll probably be at the Ameribraid booth a little bit. I'll probably be at the Pops booth a reasonable amount. I'll also have a table, thanks to the guys at Ameribraid for that. And that's about it. So anyway, if you have ever had any interest in buying a knife from me, by all means, come by the table and see what you can find. Otherwise, you know, hey, just come by and say hi. I'm not sure what the table number is now, but I'll let everybody know before that all rolls around. Also, if you're enjoying the channel, I hope you'll support us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Walter Sorrells. And I've had this PDF that I've been handing out to folks for a little while, free PDF with just kind of some tips about how to get started in knife making. Just go to my website, waltersorrellsblades.com, and you can sign up there. I mentioned that in the context of what I'm mostly going to be talking about today, which is going to be kind of some, you know, how to take some of the next steps in knife making if this is something that you maybe want to ramp up a little bit in your life. Before I do that, though, I will quickly try to answer a question from Stefan Gran. He's Swedish. You know, one of the things that I've been contacted about many times over the years, you know, American smiths obviously spend a lot of time on YouTube, and so there are always these guys talking about American steels, and if you're in Europe or Asia or someplace else for that matter, coming up with steels that are equivalent to what American knife makers are talking about is sometimes a challenge. So Stefan is trying to find something that is equivalent to my favorite steel, W2. And so what he tracked down was something known as material number 1.2833, or the DIN number is 100V1. These are both German standards, the material number and the DIN. I won't go into too much depth. I could bore you with all this standard stuff, but if you're just getting started, the basic pitch here is that in the United States, there are two standards making bodies that have come up historically with names for steels. And generally speaking, you know, these names will correspond. You can get some kind of sense of what the characteristics of the steel would be from the names. There's kind of a systematic way of doing it. Same is true in Europe. There are UK standards, there are German standards, and then I think there are general European standards as a whole. And I'm sure that, you know, Japan and Russia and China probably all have their own standards also. So if you're trying to track down a particular kind of steel, you can Google these things and find out about them. And usually you can figure out how, you know, what they correspond to within these different standards. So Stefan is correct that this, I won't go through all the material names and so on, but this is a similar steel to W2. I don't know if it's made at this point in Europe. W2 is not manufactured in the United States all that regularly anymore. But he thinks he's able to track some down. So I would definitely encourage him to do that, try it out, see how it works for him. Specifically, what he's looking to do is to make swords, you know, sort of Japanese style swords, much like I make modern style swords that use modern steels, but in that sort of Japanese tradition with a hamon, differential hardening, a look that would be consistent with Japanese swords. And you need very specific kinds of high carbon steels to do that. it seems like this steel will do that. So as I said, I'd encourage him to track something down. He also wanted to know about sizes. Basically, I use 3/8 by 1 inch most of the time for katanas, and 1/4 by 1 for wakizashis and tantos, which are shorter swords and knives. You can also get round bars. I usually get 5/8 inch round bars. 5/8 inch rounds have a sufficient amount of steel in them to make pretty much any kind of Japanese blade. Oh, so one other thing I wanted to mention is that, on most of my builds, I build a particular knife, or sometimes it's a tool or something like that, and then I'll sell it online. And most of the things that I make for videos are kind of simple, and sometimes they're a little rough around the edges because I'm trying to make them to show you something rather than to, make something that is what I would normally make to sell somebody. But I've done a bunch of kitchen knives recently, and these are actually made to a higher standard than my standard demonstrator knife. So, this is just one of them. You can go to my website, waltersorrellsblades.com, or tacticsarmory.com, which is my kind of semi-production stuff. And there'll be a bunch of those for sale that I haven't sold yet. Normally, these demonstrator type knives, the YouTube knives, go like that. But these are priced a little bit higher because they're made to a higher level of fit and finish. So if you're interested in a kitchen knife, something a gift for a friend or something like that, you might go check that out. Because I got a few of those in stock, and would love to get them into somebody's hands that would, have a good use for them. Okay, so let's turn to kind of the heart of what I'm going to be talking about today, which is how to sort of turn that corner from this being a hobby that costs you money to maybe making it break even or even into some kind of profession. So I've got a note from Kester Smith, who's one of my Patreon supporters. He says, "Hey Walter, how'd you do it? How did you finally have the courage to pull the trigger and quit your job and do knife making, blacksmithing, sword making full time? All I can think about is sketching, drawing, wanting to be in the shop full time, but his issue is that, he's the sole support of his family. If I understand this, he's got kids, wife, so on and so on. So, he's asking how I went about it. Well, the thing about this is everybody's story is different. The way that you navigate through your life is always going to be different depending on your background and your financial resources and your family and how old you are and all of that sort of thing. I'm going to briefly, or at least I'm going to try to make it brief, briefly sort of talk about my story. It's probably not all that relevant to most people's stories, but there's some lessons that I think you can draw from it, which I'll get to as soon as I get done. I'll try to make this as compact as possible. But anyway, I didn't start out with a normal 9-to-5 kind of job. I've been a writer since I was in my 20s, I guess, and that was my full-time occupation until I got started, got pretty serious with knife making. So I had been a writer for about 20 years when I got started with bladesmithing as a hobby. And so, I understood kind of some of the rhythms of being an artist. The reality is that making knives is that you're becoming an artist if you've made the decision to make knives. You have to understand that being an artist is not like being a normal person. It's different financially. The rhythms of your life change. It's just, you can't just show up at 9 o'clock and clock out at 6 or whatever and you're done. It's a job that, consumes you a lot of the time. Anyway, what happened with me was I'd been a writer for a long time, written a whole bunch of books, and about the time my son was born, I started fooling around out in the shop making knives. Did that for a while, and at a certain point, I wanted to purchase that tool sitting right over there off camera that you can't see, which is a hydraulic forge press. Now, my wife had been working most of my adult life, most of our married life. And so, my income did this and hers did that. And so that gave us this baseline that allowed us, frankly, it gave me the freedom to be able to pursue a craft that had a very up and down income stream. And so, anyway, our son was born right around the same time that I started making knives. Soon after that, my wife left the workplace for a while to take care of our son, and so I became the sole support of our family. And it was a very difficult time financially. And so I started, in order to buy that forge press, I started trying to sell my swords. And in the process, found that there was a market for it, and within a matter of a couple years, I went from being a guy who was fooling around out in the garage to a guy with 2 jobs. And for a good solid decade and a half, for all intents and purposes, I went to my kids' baseball games and I worked. And that was it. That was my whole life. Get up at 9 o'clock or whatever, I'd write for a certain period of time, then at a certain period of time, I'd go out to the shop, and I would work again. And I'm not saying that this was every single day, but it wasn't uncommon, at least for a certain period of time, that, I worked until midnight. And it was just very common that I worked 7 days a week. In fact, it's still common that I work 7 days a week. And that's just kind of the reality of doing crazy artistic stuff. So at a certain point, my wife, went back full-time to work. That kind of took some pressure off of me of having to pay every bill in the house. And eventually I was able to say, okay, I just can't, I'm getting older, I'm getting tired of working, 70, 80 hours a week or whatever it is. And so, I just said, okay, I've got to make a choice, writing or knife making. And so, I let go reluctantly of writing as my primary source of income and focused on making knives. Nothing courageous about this whatsoever. It was just a natural evolution of what I was doing, and in a sense, it was just kind of saying like, okay, I give up. It was like I was crying uncle, I couldn't do what I'd been doing anymore. And like I say, my wife had come back to work, and so the income stream situation was very different. So, that led me to where I am today, where I'm just doing this full time. So 3 main lessons I would say from this. The first is that, you have to understand that this is a financial as well as an artistic endeavor. I hate selling stuff with a passion. There's nothing worse to me than having to hold up stuff that I've made and say, hey, could you give me some money for this? But the reality is, if you don't do that, this whole make a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door thing is crap. You have to actually be a salesman as part of what you do. And so that's just kind of the reality of taking on, moving from something being a hobby to being your job. As part of that, it's, your family situation is everything. And, I was very fortunate that my wife never looked at me as, he's going to go off and, go to some office building or factory or something and bring home the bacon every single day. She always understood that I was kind of an artistic personality and that I was going to be doing crazy stuff. And so, I never had to sell her on that idea. But for a lot of people, especially if you have been pursuing some kind of normal job for most of your life, and people have expectations that, this is what you do, is show up with the paycheck every Friday. there's an education process that you'll have to go through with your family to say, hey, look, this is something I really believe in. This is something that I want to do, you know, and it's going to involve some sacrifices, and I need your support. Maybe that means I need you to get a job, or, you know, I need you to change your your part-time work to a full-time job, or, you know, whatever it might be. It could be, I mean, there are a lot of other ways of skinning this cat, but it's something that you have to address with your family. Okay, so what that leads me to as the next thing is, if you're going to ask your family to make sacrifices to make you happy, you better be damn sure that you know what you're asking for and that you want this thing that you think you want. So I highly recommend that anybody who's thinking about, hey, should I quit this job and make knives, that you spend a lot of time doing it, that you spend every weekend in your shop 9 to 5, that you go in the shop after you get home from work and you're tired and everything, spend a lot of hours making knives, spend a lot of time grinding. Spend a lot of time filing, doing these difficult physical tasks that are part of knife making, and spend some time selling your wares. You know, try to take on all aspects of this craft and raise the amount of money that you're making. But this is actually the most important thing. It's not the money side of it, it's your personal commitment. When I was in college, I decided I wanted to be a guitar player. So, I mean, I'd been playing guitar for a long time, but I decided I wanted to be a professional guitar player. So I quit college, came home back to South Carolina, rented a mobile home, got a job as an electrician, and every day after I wired houses, I would come home and I'd set up my amp and I would play guitar. I'd play scales, 2 hours a night in my super hot, you know, smelly old trailer. And I very quickly came to the realization I did not want to be a professional guitar player. I wanted to be a hobbyist. I love playing guitar. I still play guitar to this day. I just made a new guitar last week. I love music. It's great, but it's a hobby. And I only found that out by spending a whole lot of time really concentrating on it and realizing, like, it wasn't something I wanted to spend 8 hours a day on. So it's extremely valuable to you if you want to make these big tectonic changes in your life, to make sure that you really want to make this change, that it's really something that you want to do. So I guess I would say, as a final point to sort of wrap that up, there are things that are great as hobbies that aren't so great as jobs. And everybody has to discover which things they're really passionate about and interested in and which they aren't. And it takes a little bit of time and effort to find that out. But every job is a grind. And most people who have artistic temperaments go through a period where they're just in love with whatever it is they're doing, painting or whatever it is. They spend every waking minute thinking about it. But over time, it starts to become a job. It starts to become routine. It starts to become, you know, you have to get up and make yourself get to work just like you would if you're, you know, collecting garbage. And that doesn't mean that it sucks. It just means that, you know, it goes back to being real life. So just, you know, recognize that you may actually be happier just piddling around out in the shop and not putting a whole bunch of pressure on yourself to have to, you know, spend 12 hours out in front of a grinder every day. Okay, so this is a slightly more practical question, but it goes along with what I was just talking about. This is from Lou Jarrell. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. He said, I see a lot of videos online about making knives, but not many about selling them. You know, so he wants to know, how do you price them? Where can you sell your knives? You know, Facebook Market says you can't use their platform since it's considered a weapon. You can sell kitchen knives, but not hobby knives. You know, he says he's spent a lot of time making knives, but he needs to recoup a little bit of money. So he's not saying, I want to become a professional knife maker. He's just saying, hey, look, the hobby has some expenses, and I would like to make it more of a break-even thing than something I'm just shoveling money into. So, you know, I think this is something that's actually much more common than the previous case where people are actually saying, hey, I want to do this as a profession. So here's my general point on this. Everybody thinks that being an artist means, you know, making these things. And it's true that a large part of your job is to go out and get on the belt grinder and make stuff. But it's not the whole job. And any kind of art to get to people requires that you also be a salesman. There's nothing that I hate worse than selling stuff. I don't like talking about money. I don't like dealing with money. It is the most odious part of my job, but it has to be done. You know, like I said earlier, I mean, I spent a good chunk of the early part of my knife making journey as the sole support of my family. So if you know that your car is going to get taken away on a hook if you don't bring in some money this week, it really lights a fire under you, and it kind of clarifies that this is part of your job just as much as making knives. So what I would say is you just have to be resourceful. There's no one way to sell knives. There are people who sell knives at gun shows and crafts fairs. There are people who sell knives exclusively online, Etsy, on your website. You know, maybe you don't know anything about making websites. You got to figure it out, or you're going to have to pay somebody to do it for you. Selling on Instagram, you know, like. But if you do Instagram, like Facebook Marketplace, you know, there are guardrails about what you can and can't sell and what you can pitch and what you can't. That's your job. If you want to actually make a few bucks doing this, your job is to figure out how you do that. And there's not just one way of doing it. Distributors, that's another one. Selling through retail, you know, maybe you know people in the gun business, you know, you can go around and sell stuff to, you know, through gun stores. You have to look around and try and figure out, okay, who are the people that, you know, what's the kind of knife that am I making kitchen knives? Am I making hunting knives? Am I making tactical knives? Am I making something from some particular historical tradition like Japanese or medieval, you know, swords? Each one of these areas is going to start to answer some questions and start to determine the places that you can and can't sell. And it's not an overnight thing. You know, part of being able to sell stuff, and this goes back to his pricing question, you know, the price is what somebody's willing to pay for it. And my theory's always been to try and kind of underprice my wares a little bit. I would rather provide value than have people get home with something and say, ooh, boy, I kind of overpaid for this. Your reputation in the long term will always be better if you make stuff that delivers value to people. See what people are doing. You know, this is a common mistake that people make in pricing is they'll look and they'll see that Kyle Royer's charging $40,000 for a sword, and they'll say, oh, well, I'll charge $40,000. And guess what? They'll still have that sword sitting in a case 10 years later because they didn't have the reputation. Whether the sword is that good or not, it just takes a while to accumulate a reputation that allows you to demand a certain price. So you always have to figure out, okay, here's what these, you know, established guys are charging for X or Y or Z, and you got to charge less. If you don't, people will catch up to you and they'll figure out, I mean, especially if your work is not as good as those established guys, it'll hurt you in the long run. So, like I said, always, my theory anyway, always try to provide value. But the main wrap up on that is just, it is part of your job if you want to sell things, and get online is probably the best place that you can go to and try and figure out what other guys are doing to sell their knives. Go to their websites, see what they say about themselves. See if they say, oh, I'm going to all these knife shows. Maybe you should go to those knife shows. Do they say, oh, go to Instagram to find out where all my new knives are? Looking online will help you figure out what a lot of other guys are doing successfully, and then that gives you something, to copy, I guess you'd say. And the final point on this is just that it takes a lot of time. Selling stuff is a whole separate thing from making the stuff. And if you think you can spend 90% of your time making and 10% selling, you're probably kidding yourself. All right, well, thanks for hanging out with me here today. This one kind of went on pretty long, but I hope there was some valuable information in there for you. I know a lot of guys are really here more, about knife making basics and not so much about the financial side. They're not interested in selling knives or whatever. But anyway, it might give you a little bit of an interesting perspective about how knife makers, how the sausage is made, I guess. Also, do come and visit me at the Blade Show next month, and I guess that's about all I got for you right now. So keep on making those knives. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years. So I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. Walter Sorrells Blades.com.